My daughter-in-law's text came through at 9:47 p.m., 14 words. Don't come tomorrow. It's too much trouble right now. We need space. I read it 4 times standing in my kitchen with a birthday card already signed. 24 hours later, I was sitting in a parked car outside her apartment building holding a wrapped present nobody wanted, and a man I'd never met was calling my phone to say, "Mr. Hensley, you need to come inside." I didn't know yet that those 7 words would be the last normal thing that happened to me for 2 weeks. My name is Walter Hensley. Everyone calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 39 years as a licensed electrical contractor in Springfield, Missouri, wiring everything from strip malls off Battlefield Road to half the houses in the Galloway neighborhood. I believed, right up until that Tuesday in August, that if you kept showing up for your family, kept your word, and kept your mouth shut about the things that annoyed you, love would take care of the rest. I was wrong about that. Not about the showing up part. About the rest. Because showing up isn't always enough when somebody is working very hard, behind a closed door, to make sure you never see what's actually happening. This became one of those moments I'll carry for the rest of my life. The kind you replay at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand where I was standing before that phone rang. My wife, Eleanor, passed 2 years ago this past March. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 5 months. 38 years of marriage ended in a hospice room on Sunshine Street with a box fan running because she liked the white noise. I won't dwell on that because this isn't really her story, but I need you to understand that losing her rearranged everything in me. I had one son left in this world who mattered to me the way she had, and that was Daniel. Daniel is 34. Good kid, always was. Quiet, a little too eager to keep the peace, which I used to think was a virtue in him until I learned the hard way it can also be a weakness. He works as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company, transferred to their Tulsa office 3 years ago for a promotion that came with a 14% raise and, frankly, more headaches than money. He married Brooke Calloway a year after that move. I liked her fine at the wedding. She was polished, quick with a compliment, good at making a room feel warmer just by walking into it. Eleanor would have said she was a lot of shine for not much substance, but Eleanor said things like that about people before she really knew them, and sometimes she was wrong. This time she wasn't. They had my grandson, Tucker, 2 years ago this coming October. I drove down to Tulsa for the birth. Sat in the waiting room of St. Francis Hospital for 11 hours drinking bad coffee out of a machine that took exact change only. And when they finally let me hold him, 7 pounds 2 ounces, red-faced and furious at the world the way all newborns are, something in my chest that had gone quiet since Eleanor died woke back up. I want to be clear about this because people ask me sometimes if I regret how close I got to that boy, given everything that happened later. I don't. Not for 1 second. That's the part revenge stories never tell you honestly enough. The love was real before any of the rest of it started. That's what made it hurt. For the first year, I drove down to Tulsa almost every month. 3 hours each way on Highway 44, past Joplin, past the Oklahoma state line, radio tuned to whatever AM station would hold a signal that far out. I'd bring groceries, because young families never have enough of the boring stuff. Diapers, coffee filters, laundry pots. I'd bring Tucker something small every time, a wooden truck, a set of stacking cups, nothing extravagant. Brooke used to call it Grandpa's Care Package Day and post pictures online with little heart emojis under them. Daniel used to walk me to my truck when I left and say, "Thanks for coming, Dad. Means a lot." Those were good years. I want you to hold on to that image, because it matters for what comes later. Somewhere around 18 months ago, something started to shift. Small things first. I'd call on a Sunday, our standing time since Tucker was born, and Daniel wouldn't pick up. He'd text back an hour later. "Sorry, busy day, talk later." Later would come and go. I told myself he was a working father with a toddler. That busy was just what 34 looks like now. My own father used to say the same thing about me when I was that age and building the business, so I didn't push. But the visits started changing too. Brooke began texting me the week before, sometimes the day before, saying Tucker had a cold, or they had a family thing on Daniel's side of things that had nothing to do with me. Or, this one stuck with me, that the apartment's a mess right now, maybe next month. I didn't know it yet, but I was being managed. Slowly, carefully, the way you turn down a thermostat 1 degree at a time so nobody in the room notices they're getting cold. I mentioned it to my sister, Donna, who lives 40 minutes from me in Nixa. Donna's 71, sharp as a tack, outlived 2 husbands, and doesn't have much patience for nonsense. Walt, she told me over coffee at the Cracker Barrel off James River Freeway, when a young wife starts controlling when a grandfather gets to see his own grandson, that's not about scheduling. That's about power. You mark my words. I told her she was being dramatic. She told me to call her back in 6 months and tell her she was wrong. I never got the chance, because 6 months later I was sitting in a parked car outside Brooke's apartment building watching my own reflection in the windshield, holding a present with a 4-year-old's name on it, and a stranger was calling to tell me to come inside. Let me tell you about that day properly, because I've replayed it more times than I can count and I want to get every piece of it right. It was a Tuesday, August the 11th. Tucker's birthday party had been scheduled for that Saturday, but I'd asked Daniel 2 weeks earlier if I could come down early, on my own, just to have a quiet afternoon with him before the party got loud with other kids and cousins from Brooke's side. Daniel said, "Sure, Dad, come Tuesday, we'll grill something." I bought Tucker a wooden train set from a shop on Commercial Street, $42, hand-painted, the kind of thing that doesn't need batteries and doesn't break. I wrapped it in blue paper myself, badly, the way a man who spent his life around conduit and circuit breakers wraps things. I packed an overnight bag because Daniel had said I could stay in their guest room, which used to be his home office before Tucker outgrew the crib. I left Springfield at 11 in the morning. 3 hours down 44, stopped once in Veneta for gas and a Diet Coke, pulled into the parking lot of the Copper Ridge Apartments on East 71st Street in Tulsa right around 2:20 in the afternoon. I remember the temperature because it was on the bank sign across the street, 96 degrees. I remember sitting in my truck for a second, looking at the wrapped train set on the passenger seat, feeling that particular kind of happy that comes with knowing you're about to see a face that lights up when it sees yours. My phone buzzed at 2:24. "Brooke, don't come today. Daniel's not feeling well, and honestly, Walt, it's too much trouble right now. We need some space as a family. I'll let you know about the party. Walt." Not Dad, not even a joke name. Just Walt. Like I was a delivery driver, she was rerouting. I sat there in that parking lot with the engine running and the AC blowing, and I read it maybe 4 times, same as I'd read the one the night before. Then I did something I'm not proud of, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I didn't drive away. I put the truck in park, right there in a visitor spot, and I sat. I want to be honest with you about why. It wasn't stubbornness, not entirely. Something in the wording bothered me. Too much trouble right now. Not Tucker's contagious, not we're swamped, but too much trouble, like I was a burden being weighed against something else. And Daniel not feeling well. Daniel, who 2 days earlier had texted me a photograph of Tucker eating watermelon on their little balcony, smiling, looking fine, the whole family looking fine. Something didn't sit right. The same something Donna had been warning me about at that Cracker Barrel table for 6 months. So I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I didn't know it yet, but that was the smartest thing I did all day, because at 3:06 p.m., a man I had never met called my cell phone. "Mr. Hensley? This is Roy Castellano. I manage the Copper Ridge property. I got your number off the guarantor paperwork on Unit 214. I need you to come inside." I felt my whole chest go cold the way it does when you know before you know. "Is my son all right?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause a decent man gives you before he says something he wishes he didn't have to. "I think you should just come up, sir. Apartment 214. I'll meet you at the door." I left that train set on the passenger seat. I didn't lock the truck. I don't remember the walk from the parking lot to the building. Don't remember the stairs. Only remember that by the time I reached the 2nd floor, my legs were moving faster than I'd moved in years, and a woman I didn't recognize, mid-60s maybe, standing outside apartment 216 with her arms crossed, and a look on her face I can only describe as relief mixed with fury, said, "You're the grandfather? Thank God. I've been trying to get someone here for 3 days. 3 days. I want you to hold on to that number, because everything that came after built on it. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. If you're just joining us, grab something to drink, get comfortable, because this story only gets heavier before it gets better. And if you've been with us before, you already know, hit that subscribe button now, because you're going to want to see how this family came out the other side. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now, back to that hallway. Roy Castellano met me at the door to 214 with a master key already in his hand and an expression that told me he'd rehearsed what he was about to say and still didn't want to say it. "Sir, I want to be upfront with you before we go in. We got a welfare call from your neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, 3 days ago. Said she hadn't seen your son leave for work, hadn't heard the baby, and the mail was piling up. We knocked twice. Nobody answered, and by law I can't force entry without either a police wellness check or direct authorization from someone on the lease or the guarantor agreement. That's you. I've been trying every number I had for you since Sunday. I hadn't gotten a single call from that number. I checked later. Every attempt Roy Castellano made had gone to a Tulsa number that rang twice and disconnected, which told me later, once I understood the whole picture, that somebody had been screening what reached me, and I don't mean the property manager." He opened the door. The apartment was dark, blinds drawn in the middle of the afternoon, and it smelled the way a place smells when nobody has taken out the trash or opened a window in days. I called out for Daniel. Nothing. I called for Tucker, and that silence was worse than any sound could have been. I found my son on the bathroom floor of that apartment, conscious but barely, curled against the base of the tub in a t-shirt soaked through with sweat, an empty insulin pen on the tile beside him. Daniel was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic at 19 years old. He manages it well, always has, checks his levels, carries glucose tablets, has for 15 years. But a man alone for 3 days, unable to reach his supplies properly because, as I learned within the hour, his glucometer and his backup insulin had been packed into a suitcase that wasn't his, sitting by the front door, ready to go somewhere he didn't know about. I got down on that bathroom floor with my son the way I hadn't held him since he was small enough for me to carry on my shoulders through the Missouri State Fair, and I called 911 with a hand that would not stop shaking. Roy Castellano stood in the doorway with his phone already dialing too, and Mrs. Alvarez, God bless that woman, went and got a wet towel and a glass of orange juice without anybody asking her to, because she said later, "In my day, you didn't wait to be told what a sick man needed." Daniel was semi-conscious, blood sugar critically low, dehydrated, disoriented enough that when the paramedics asked him his own name, he got it right, but couldn't tell them what day it was. The lead paramedic, a woman named Delacroix, looked at me after they'd gotten a line in him and gotten some color back into his face and said, "Sir, if this had gone another 12 hours, we'd be having a very different conversation. I want you to sit with that phrase the way I had to. A very different conversation. That's the kind of sentence that rearranges a man permanently. And Tucker, my grandson, not in that apartment. Not with Daniel. Nowhere." I asked Roy Castellano where the child was, and he told me he didn't know, that he'd only ever seen the mother's car in the lot maybe once in the last 4 days, and that Mrs. Alvarez had mentioned Brooke had been loading things into a rented SUV over the weekend, a stroller, boxes, suitcases, while Daniel, according to Mrs. Alvarez's account through the thin apartment wall, had been asking her in a raised voice where she thought she was taking their son. I want to be honest about the state I was in at that moment, riding in the back of an ambulance holding my son's hand while paramedics worked, not knowing where my 4-year-old grandson was, not knowing if my daughter-in-law had simply left or had taken him somewhere I'd never find him. I have run a business, buried a wife, and built a life out of staying calm under pressure. That afternoon, for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I did not feel calm. I felt like the floor of the world had opened underneath me. They admitted Daniel to St. Francis, the same hospital where Tucker had been born, and by 7 p.m. that evening his numbers had stabilized enough for the doctor, a young man named Dr. Osei, to tell me he'd be all right, that he needed fluids and monitoring overnight, but the danger had passed. I sat in a plastic chair beside that hospital bed and watched my son sleep. And somewhere around 9 o'clock, he woke up enough to focus his eyes on me and say 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about what the last several months had actually been. "Dad." She took him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that hospital room chair until the sun came up, and somewhere around midnight, I called the one person in this world I trusted to help me think clearly when I couldn't do it myself. Ray Delgado and I have known each other since 1987, back when he was still a Springfield PD detective and I was rewiring the station house on Chestnut Expressway on a city contract. Ray retired 11 years ago, but never really stopped being a cop, the way some men never really stop being what they spent 30 years becoming. I called him at 12:40 a.m. and told him everything. The canceled visit, the landlord's call, the 3-day welfare check, my son on that bathroom floor, My grandson nowhere to be found. Ray was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. The way he used to get quiet right before he told you something you needed to hear, whether you wanted to or not. Walt, he said, this didn't happen in 3 days. Something's been building for months. You said the visits started getting cut back a year and a half ago? About that. Then that's when it started. Whatever this is, she's been laying groundwork a long time. I want you to do something for me before you do anything else. Don't confront anybody. Don't post anything. Don't call her family. Don't do a single thing that tips your hand. You get your son stable, and you let me start pulling threads quietly. Can you do that? I told him I could, though every instinct in my body wanted to drive straight to wherever Brooke Calloway was and demand to know where my grandson had gone. But 39 years of business had taught me the same lesson Ray was teaching me now. The man who reacts first loses. The man who gathers everything first wins. By 9 the next morning, with Daniel resting and a nurse named Patricia promising to call me the second there was any change, Ray was already at the Copper Ridge Apartments talking to Roy Castellano and, more importantly, to Mrs. Alvarez, who turned out to be one of the most important people in this entire story, and I want to give her the space she deserves, because without her, I don't know that I'd still have a son. Carmen Alvarez was 68 years old, a retired school cafeteria worker who'd lived in apartment 216 for 11 years and had, by her own account, watched Tucker grow from a car seat carried up the stairs to a little boy who waved at her through the fence of the shared courtyard every single morning. She told Ray, and later told me herself over coffee at her kitchen table, that over the past 6 months she'd watched something curdle next door. Raised voices late at night, Brooke leaving for hours at a time, sometimes overnight, with Tucker in tow, no explanation offered to anyone. Daniel looking thinner, quieter, sometimes with his blinds drawn in the middle of the day like a man who didn't want anyone seeing in. I called that boy's father 3 times in the last 2 months, Carmen told me, her hand resting flat on her kitchen table like she was steadying herself even in the retelling. Every time, it went to a number that wasn't working right. I didn't know it then, but I know now. Somebody didn't want that call getting through. That single detail became the thread Ray pulled hardest on, because it meant this wasn't chaos. It was engineered. Ray spent 4 days working through what he still had access to as a retired officer with contacts who owed him favors, plus what any determined man with a laptop and a library card can find if he knows where to look. What he found, laid out on my kitchen table back in Springfield on a Saturday afternoon while Daniel slept upstairs in his childhood bedroom, changed the shape of everything I thought I understood about my daughter-in-law. Brooke had lost her job as a marketing coordinator at a firm in downtown Tulsa 14 months earlier. She never told Daniel. For over a year, she had been leaving the apartment every weekday morning dressed for an office that no longer employed her, driving to a coffee shop on Yale Avenue, and spending her days there while collecting unemployment under a different mailing address, a P.O. box she'd rented 3 towns over, so the paperwork wouldn't show up at their apartment. Daniel had been giving her half his paycheck every 2 weeks for what he believed was their household budget: rent, groceries, Tucker's daycare. Ray's research, cross-referenced against bank statements Daniel eventually authorized me to help him pull, showed that roughly $31,000 over 14 months had gone somewhere other than the household. Some of it went to credit cards Daniel didn't know existed, cards that had, in turn, funded regular weekend trips to Dallas that Brooke told Daniel were girls' trips with coworkers. Except the coworkers didn't exist anymore. The company had let her go over a year ago. The Dallas trips, it turned out, were to see a man named Cole Whitfield, someone Brooke had known before she ever met my son, a relationship Ray traced back through phone records that Daniel, thank God, still had legal access to as a joint account holder. And that suitcase by the front door, the one packed with Daniel's diabetic supplies mixed in among Tucker's clothes? Brooke had been planning to leave for Dallas permanently, not with Daniel's blessing, not with a custody agreement. With Tucker, on a Wednesday, while Daniel was recovering, or not recovering, from whatever happened after she'd apparently, according to what Mrs. Alvarez overheard through that shared wall, deliberately delayed calling anyone when she found him in distress that Friday night, choosing instead to load the car and leave him there. I want to be careful here, because I know how a story like this can tip into something that sounds too calculated to be believed. But Ray found the receipts. Literally. A U-Haul reservation for a one-way trailer, Picked up that Saturday morning. The very morning of Tucker's planned birthday party, destination Plano, Texas. A lease application, already submitted under Brooke's name alone, for a 2-bedroom apartment 11 minutes from Cole Whitfield's address. And an email, printed and placed in the folder Ray handed me, sent from Brooke's account to her sister 9 days before I ever got that text canceling my visit. Once I'm out of Tulsa, this is going to be so much cleaner. Daniel will fight for a while, but he'll get tired. His dad is the only real problem. He won't let this go easy, so I need him out of the picture until we're already gone. I need him out of the picture. That was me. 14 words in a text message calling me too much trouble were never really about a Tuesday afternoon visit. They were about making sure the one person paying close attention wasn't standing in the room when the walls came down. Here's where I want to pause and tell you something, because right up until Ray showed me those printouts, some small, stubborn part of me was still holding out hope that this was a misunderstanding, that Brooke was overwhelmed, maybe going through something private, and that I'd overreacted. I think most of us hold on to that hope longer than we should, because the alternative is admitting someone you welcomed into your family, someone you drove 3 hours a month to see, was capable of watching your son suffer and calculating whether it was convenient to help him. That hope ended the moment I read that email. Daniel read it too, sitting at my kitchen table in Springfield 8 days after I found him on that bathroom floor, color back in his face, blood sugar stable, a folder of his wife's betrayal spread out in front of him like a verdict. He didn't cry, not right away. He sat very still, the way I remember sitting still the day the doctor told us about Eleanor's diagnosis, that particular stillness that comes right before a man's whole understanding of his life gets rewritten. She left me on that floor, he said finally, quiet, almost to himself. She was already loading the car. She heard me. Mrs. Alvarez heard everything through the wall. She just left. I put my hand on my son's shoulder, and I didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that would make that true fact smaller than it was. But I want to tell you about Tucker, because that's the part that mattered most, and I don't want you sitting through this whole story worried about that little boy without an answer. Brooke had not, in fact, taken him to Texas that Wednesday. Roy Castellano's welfare check, and my unplanned arrival, had interrupted her timeline. When Ray and I, working with an attorney I'd hired named Priscilla Boone out of downtown Tulsa, filed for an emergency custody order the following Monday based on documented abandonment and endangerment, the court granted Daniel temporary sole physical custody within 72 hours, expedited because of the medical emergency and Mrs. Alvarez's sworn statement about what she'd witnessed. Tucker had been staying, it turned out, with Brooke's sister in Broken Arrow the entire time, safe, fed, cared for, but deliberately kept away from his father while the exit plan finished forming. I drove to that house in Broken Arrow myself the day the order came through. Priscilla Boone's paralegal beside me with the paperwork in a folder on her lap, and when that apartment door opened and I saw my grandson's face, still round with baby fat, still missing his front tooth from where he'd fallen off Daniel's shoulders that spring, I did something I hadn't done in public since Eleanor's funeral. I knelt down right there on the porch steps, and I held that boy and I cried, and I didn't care who saw it. Grandpa, he said into my shoulder, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like none of the last 2 weeks had happened at all to him. Did you bring the train? I had. It was still in my truck, still wrapped in that badly folded blue paper, and I gave it to him right there in that driveway in Broken Arrow, and for about 30 seconds, none of the rest of it mattered. Now, I promised you a sweet payoff in this story, and here it is, because a story like this isn't worth telling if it's only about what someone loses. Carmen Alvarez is the reason my son is alive. Not a doctor, not a lawyer, not me. A 68-year-old retired cafeteria worker who noticed a light not turning on and a mail pile that shouldn't have been there, who tried 3 times to reach a phone number that had been quietly sabotaged, who finally, on the 4th day, walked down to the leasing office herself and refused to leave until Roy Castellano promised her he'd force the issue. When I asked her, weeks later, why she went to that much trouble for a neighbor she wasn't even close friends with, she looked at me like the question surprised her. Because that's what you do, she said. You don't wait for it to be somebody else's job. I paid off the remaining 9 months on Carmen Alvarez's car loan without telling her I was going to do it. Found the balance through her credit union, called them directly, settled it in full, for $1,160. When she called me in tears asking why, I told her the truth. You gave my son his life back. The least I can give you is one less bill. I also set up a scholarship in Eleanor's name at the community college in Tulsa, where Carmen's granddaughter was starting nursing school that fall. $2,500 a semester for as long as the girl stayed enrolled. Some debts you can't repay with money, but you can at least try, and trying, it turns out, matters more than people think. As for Brooke, the custody hearing that followed was not close. Priscilla Boone laid out the financial records, the unemployment fraud, the hidden accounts, the Dallas trips, the sworn statement from Mrs. Alvarez about the night Daniel collapsed, and the email that spoke for itself better than any lawyer could have. The judge granted Daniel primary custody with supervised visitation only for Brooke, contingent on completed financial counseling and a psychological evaluation. Brooke moved to Plano with Cole Whitfield 3 weeks after the hearing, and as far as I know, she sees Tucker 4 days a month, always supervised, always through a court-appointed facilitator, because the judge did not take lightly a mother who packed a suitcase and left a diabetic man semi-conscious on a bathroom floor rather than delay a moving timeline. I take no pleasure in saying that plainly. I take no pleasure in any of it. But I also don't apologize for it, because a 4-year-old boy needed somebody in that courtroom telling the truth on his behalf, and I was glad it was us. Daniel moved back to Springfield that November. Not into my house. He wanted his own place, and I respected that, but into a 2-bedroom rental 8 minutes from mine, on Republic Road, close enough that Tucker could ride his bike to my driveway once he's old enough, close enough that Sunday dinners aren't something we schedule around excuses anymore. Daniel's insurance company let him transfer his position back to the Springfield branch without missing a step, which tells you something about the kind of employee my son has always been. Even during the year, he was quietly falling apart at home, and nobody at that office ever knew. I asked him once, a few months after all of it settled, whether he regretted marrying Brooke in the first place, whether if he could go back he'd have seen it coming the way Donna claimed she had at that Cracker Barrel table. He thought about it for a long time before he answered, longer than I expected. I don't think I could have seen all of it, he said. But I think somewhere in me, I knew something was wrong, and I kept telling myself it was normal marriage stuff because I didn't want to be the kind of man who gives up. I think that's what she was counting on. That I'd rather be miserable than admit I was wrong. I told him that's not weakness. That's just what love does to good men sometimes. It makes them patient with things that don't deserve patience. And then I told him what I'd learned from watching him on that hospital bed. What I think is maybe the truest thing I've figured out in 67 years on this earth. Love isn't proven by how much trouble you're willing to put up with from someone. It's proven by who shows up when the trouble finally arrives, and who's already halfway out the door with the car loaded before anybody asks them to help. I think about that text sometimes. Too much trouble. 14 words meant to keep me 3 hours away on a Tuesday afternoon so nobody would notice the exit already in motion. I think about how close it came to working. How if I'd simply turned that truck around in the parking lot the way any reasonable, hurt man might have, the story ends very differently, and I don't let myself finish that thought all the way through, because I don't have to. It didn't end that way. I sat in that parking lot 40 extra minutes because something in my gut told me the wording was wrong, and Roy Castellano's number came through at 3:06 in the afternoon, and my son is alive, and my grandson rides his bike down Republic Road most weekends now with training wheels that are getting looser every month, which Daniel says means we'll need to take them off soon. Tucker turned 5 this past October. We had the party at my house this time. In the backyard, string lights up along the fence the way Eleanor always liked them for birthdays. Carmen Alvarez drove up from Tulsa for it, 3.5 hours each way, because I asked her to, and because, as she put it, I wasn't about to miss the party I helped make happen. Daniel grilled burgers. Donna brought a sheet cake from the bakery on Sunshine Street that Eleanor used to love. Tucker ran around that yard in a paper birthday crown until 9 o'clock at night, and at one point he climbed up into my lap on the porch swing, sticky with cake frosting, and fell asleep there the way small children do when they finally run themselves all the way out. I sat on that swing a long time after everyone else had gone quiet. My grandson's weight settled against my chest, the porch light throwing a soft yellow glow across the yard, and I thought about a parking lot in Tulsa and a text message calling me too much trouble, and I thought that if being too much trouble means you're the one who stays, the one who drives 3 hours on a hunch, the one who sits in a car 40 extra minutes because something feels wrong, then I hope I stay exactly that kind of trouble for every single day I've got left in me. Because trouble like that, it turns out, is just another word for love that refuses to look away. If you made it this far, I hope this story reminded you of somebody in your own life who showed up when it mattered, or maybe it reminded you to be that person for someone else. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story.